Hi there, we are CCTV 42. We're online CCTV equipment suppliers. If you found this video, I suspect that you're probably looking for CCTV for an industrial building, a commercial unit, maybe somewhere like a farm, a kind of larger site than a house. If you've started to look for CCTV equipment, you're probably quite confused. There seems to be a vast array of stuff out there. You're faced with a challenge. You either go to a CCTV installer who might charge thousands of pounds and may or may not fit something which is good and will do the job. But then on the other hand, you've got suppliers like Nest, Netamo, Arlo, Ring, who on the face of it seem to offer great systems for much less money. And so what do you do? What do you buy? The good news is CCTV is not complicated. It is really, really simple. So panic not, and hopefully we can explain what you need to achieve and what equipment you will need. Essentially, CCTV is all about individual pixels, and it's a thing called pixel density. So it's how many pixels you can get on the thing that you're trying to film. Each pixel is a piece of information, and so the more pixels that you get on it or on them, the more detailed information you get. So if you take my face, if I was to have 5 pixels hitting my face, you wouldn't be able to tell who I was or what I looked like. I need about probably between 200 and 300 pixels hitting my face to be able to identify me. You need to be a little bit careful when you talk about identification. A lot of people look at a CCTV system and they can recognize someone, and so they think that constitutes identification, and it isn't. The human brain is quite a clever thing, and if you know somebody, the human brain will kind of fill in the gaps, and so you put the pieces together, and so you recognize someone when you see them on a CCTV screen. But you couldn't identify them if you didn't know them, and if you're hoping to get prosecution, it wouldn't be good enough to identify them in court and to get a prosecution. And that's often why when the police go somewhere, people say, oh, the police are rubbish because they never prosecute. They do. You've just got to give them good enough footage. If you hand them on a plate, the information they need, they will prosecute the people, and you'll get a prosecution or an identification. So in terms of pixel density, there's a couple of ways of achieving it. Your system needs to have a resolution which is high enough to achieve a decent pixel density. Originally, standard definition CCTV was 720 by 576 pixels, which is about 400,000 pixels, 0.4 megapixels. The problem with that is it doesn't give you much to play with. So given that all those pixels aren't just on the face, you're filming a wider area, it means that your pixel density is going to be quite low. So gradually the resolution's increased until we got to 1080p, which is 1920 by 1080 pixels, or about 2.1 megapixels. And 1080p that's HD footage. And that's not a bad resolution to use for CCTV. You have some systems which will go higher resolution than that, and so the immediate reaction when I said, well, you need to get more pixels on your subject is, well, just throw lots of pixels at it. Fit 8 megapixel, how many megapixel? The problem is twofold. The more pixels that you film in, the more space you take up on the hard drive, and you end up not storing footage for very long. So if you think of HD 1080p, which is 2.1 megapixel, to double the image quality, you actually need to multiply the number of pixels by 4, and that's because you're increasing pixels on the horizontal line and the vertical axis, so you get a square root of the benefit. Sorry if it sounds a bit scientific, but by just going from, let's say, 2 megapixel to 4 megapixel, you're only increasing the actual image resolution by just over 30%, but you're halving your storage time. And if you go to 8 megapixel to theoretically, and I say theoretically, double the image quality, you've reduced it by 4 times. And it's really important that you have footage which stores for a decent amount of time. If you think, for instance, over Christmas, you're going to be away for potentially a couple of weeks, and when you do return, if something's happened, you need the footage to stay on your system for a while, so you're not panicking, thinking, we've got to download this footage, otherwise we lose it. It's also important that you film 24/7, 7 days a week. By only filming motion-triggered events, there's a couple of things that happen. First of all, it's quite difficult to piece together footage. There's a possibility that you lose footage because your trigger area you're using isn't necessarily the whole screen. And also, sometimes the gaps are as important as the actual footage itself. The most common one would be a failed delivery. You order something on the internet, the company say they delivered, but they didn't. And they say, oh yes, we delivered at 3 minutes past 2 and we left it on your doorstep, it must have been stolen. Well, if you only record on motion triggering, you obviously won't have any footage because they weren't there, but you couldn't use that as definitive proof that they weren't there, because it may just be that your system's not very good and didn't pick them up. Whereas if you have the footage for the period that they said they delivered, you can categorically say, no, you didn't deliver because we've got the footage from that period. So it's really important that you do 24/7 recording. The biggest single mistake that people make when they're fitting CCTV is they fit cameras which are too wide angle. Now, at the start of the video, I mentioned people like Nest, Arlo, Netamo, people like that. All of those cameras are fixed lens wide angle, sometimes uber wide angle lens cameras. And initially you think, well, that's a great idea because I'm covering a big wide area. The problem is, however, that the pixels you start with here, as we move away from the camera, the pixels spread apart, and so by the time you reach the person who you're filming, very few of the pixels are hitting that individual person. You're filming a big wide area and you're spreading your pixels too thinly. And so what you need to do is to think about where you want to film and concentrate the pixels in to that area. And you do that by using optically zoomable cameras. You optically zoom the camera in to your target area, so you're concentrating the pixels on the subject. In terms of which cameras you fit, where you film them, and where you fit them, and so on, I find it quite easy. I do it for a living, and so I look at sites all the time. And the easiest way, if you are making a system, is give us a call. We're happy to speak to you. We can talk on the phone, discuss what you're trying to achieve with your CCTV system, and we can also look at your site online. And so we can see your site, we can take measurements and so on. And from there, we can put together a solution and we can email it over to you. But essentially, you want to make sure that the cameras you're using have a long enough optical range. Be very careful. When you look at CCTV cameras advertised online, they will quote a range, sometimes a nighttime range, an IR range, or just a range. And it'll say this is a 30-meter camera. It isn't. What they're actually saying is the infrared that's built into this camera can be detected, theoretically, 30 meters away from the camera. But if it's a big wide-angle camera, the camera doesn't have an optical range of 30 meters. And that's a very, very important distinction to make. So with your industrial unit, industrial buildings, the distances involved are going to be greater than a typical house. So if you have a camera by your front door, car park just outside the front door, the distance from the camera to the car might be 3, 4, 5 meters. On an industrial building, it's quite rare that the distance is less than 10 meters between the camera and the person you're trying to film. And it could be as much as 30, 40, 50, 60 meters. If you're filming the entrance onto a site and you've got a pinch point, for instance, where people and vehicles are going to be, that might be 50 meters from your camera. So you want that camera zoomed right in. So this is one of our more common cameras that we sell. And a camera that looks like this, either an enclosed dome or an open dome, is going to be, generally speaking, a shorter range because you can't physically fit a longer lens into this camera body. So this particular camera can be adjusted from 2.8 millimeters, which is about 90-degree angle of view, down to 13 millimeters, which is about 20-degree angle of view. So fully zoomed in at 13 millimeters, it's got an effective range of maybe 12 to 15 meters in terms of identifying someone. At its widest setting, which is 90 degrees, it's only got an effective range of maybe 2 to 3 meters if you want to get clear identification. And so that's makes a massive difference, as you can see. So with wider angle lenses, they really are a very short effective range. A camera in this sort of body style, a more traditional looking camera, you can fit a longer optical lens into these camera bodies. So we do a camera which can identify somebody up to 50 or even 60 meters away, and actually it's probably one of our best cameras in terms of prosecutions. It holds our record for prosecution at the moment because it can identify people a long way away. They don't necessarily realise they're being filmed, and so you can get identification when they're kind of off guard a little bit, and you can catch vehicle details and individuals and so on. So with an industrial building, you have to think carefully about what you're trying to achieve. There will be some cameras which wide angle might work. So if you just want a general overview to see where people are, if someone has had an accident, you might be able to determine that, or if someone's arrived at your front door, they've got a delivery for you, you can do that with wide angle. But as soon as you want to identify people, you need to start thinking about zooming in optically and picking key target areas. And as I say, it's what we do for a living. So although we're an online retailer, go on our website, CCTV42 and .co.uk, and you can give us a call. We can chat with you on the phone, talk about what you're trying to achieve, and then, as I say, we can come up with some solutions. And all we're really going to be doing is saying, okay, well, you want this camera here, this camera here, this camera here, and we can then email that over to you. And by all means, you can purchase off us, or at least you know what you're looking for. But the vast majority of people who sell CCTV, either as a professional installer or online, they tend to focus on wider angle cameras, and they then try and throw pixels at the problem by just increasing the number of pixels they're selling. And I always liken that to heating a house with the doors and windows wide open. If you open the doors and windows on your house on a cold day, no matter how big your boiler, your house is going to feel cold. So by optically zooming in, you're closing the doors and windows, you're insulating the property, and you don't need as big a boiler to be nice and warm. So you need a base resolution, which is good enough to provide the pixels, but then optically zoomed in so you can get lots of pixels on vehicles, faces, and so on. So I hope you've found that useful. As I say, CCTV is not complicated. People try to make it complicated. They come up with these technical solutions that really don't have much bearing. It's still down to the simple basics of pixel density, of optically zooming in on what it is you're trying to film, and that deals with the problem. The vast majority of CCTV that's fitted is very ineffective. You see people fit cameras which are far too high, far too wide angle. So, by the time someone's stood underneath the camera, they're too far away to identify them, even if they're as close to the camera as they could be. And you need to avoid those mistakes. But we can guide you through that if need be. In terms of wiring and so on, all our cameras are hardwired back to a DVR recorder, and then the DVR recorder you can connect to the internet, so you can access it on your phone or computers and so on. And so that's an easy way. We're not a massive fan of IP-based camera systems. There's quite a lot that can go wrong. The camera has to talk to the network has to talk to the NVR, and if anything goes wrong in there, you kind of lose your footage. And the same is true of off-site storage. When you go for cloud-based systems, again, there's a lot that can go wrong, and to get multiple camera feeds up the pipe to the cloud server is certainly expensive, because you've got on costs every month to do that, and there's a high risk that you lose footage. So with our system, we kind of record on site, and if need be, you can email images and so on with motion triggered events and things like that for alerts or for storage offsite and so on. But yeah, that's kind of how our systems work. As I say, I hope you found it useful. It's not difficult. Things like your wiring, for instance, your wiring in an industrial building is generally pretty straightforward. You know, a metal shed has lots of options for kind of running cables. It's not like a house where you've got plastered walls inside and you have big problems there. An industrial unit is pretty straightforward, as are farms and so on. We do quite a lot of farms as well as industrial buildings. I hope you found it useful. If you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch, either email us or go on our website, our cctv42.co.uk website, and then give us a call. We can chat through your requirements and go from there. So my name's Henry, we're CCTV42, thanks for watching, and I hope you found that useful.